used to be really jealous of single-minded people who knew what they wanted to do at an early age. People who just excelled the hell out of one thing their entire life. But with time, I think the thing that I appreciate the most is change, openness to change in ourselves and the way we think, and also the way that we move through the world. It's an attitude that makes me think about this Zen Buddhist concept called dwelling nowhere. Dwelling nowhere is the skill of being at home in the continuous flow of change. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about as I look back. This is my dad and my mom. They're from Taiwan, and they immigrated to the US. My sister and I were born and raised in the American Midwest, where we lived in a house with 7 different kinds of green wallpaper. And my dad rocked this mustard cardigan. He wanted me to be a doctor. I wanted to be more creative. And I told them I want to be an artist. And they said, hell no, And I totally understand, because they were worried that I would live a life of pain and poverty. So I studied more practical things in school. I got degrees in architecture, design, and urban planning. And I eventually made art. And I'm financially sound. So mom and dad are happy for me, yes. And when I moved to New York in my 20s, my friends and I started a design firm together. We made lots of websites and print materials. This is what we did to make money. And then we did things that we loved that made no money, or very little money. We started a record label. We made minimal techno, ambient music, and we performed with friends in many cities. And while we were doing this, we wheat pasted posters in these cities. And this is what got me into making street art. In a built environment where businesses can shout about their products and stuff on an increasing number of surfaces, and I think we need to reconsider how our public spaces are better designed so they're not just allocated to the highest bidder. Street art taught me to be scrappy, do what you can with what you have. And so I worked with community groups, used simple tools to experiment with ways that residents could share more local news, share more resources with their neighbors, share more about our memories of abandoned buildings and how they can become meaningful again. So my questions started out very civic-minded, and then they became a lot more personal after the death of someone I loved. Joan was like a mother to me. She was the one who really encouraged me to pursue my creativity and talk to my parents when I was a confused teenager. And so when she died very suddenly, I felt depressed, numb, cynical. Everything felt absurd. My inner life didn't feel like it belonged outside at all. And there was this abandoned house a block away from where I lived in New Orleans, and it looked, as sad as me. And it finally crossed my mind that it would break Joan's heart if she knew that her death made me give up. So I thought about how I could do something to honor her and reflect on mortality. So I made this homemade stencil that said, "Before I die, I want to." And some friends and I covered this house with chalkboard paint. And I stenciled it with this prompt so that anyone walking by could, pick up a piece of chalk, reflect on death and life, and share their personal aspirations in public. By the next day, the wall was entirely filled out, and it kept growing. And I remember that the responses that actually, resonated with me the most were the heartbreaking ones, the devastating ones, and the things that you don't typically tell a stranger. Like, before I die, I want to get my wife back. I want to overcome addiction. I want to be the one she believes I am. For the first time, I saw a wider range of emotions, including the pain, out in the open. And this is really what made me finally feel less alone and gave me the courage to face my own confusions. I just posted a few photos online, and then it spread. And people started inviting me to make walls with their communities. I made a website with step-by-step resources, and now thanks to passionate people around the world, there have been over 5,000 Before I Die walls in over 75 countries. Yeah, it's crazy. On walls around the world, the same big themes emerge. We want to love and be loved. We want to do something meaningful. We want to travel the world. We want to see our loved ones thrive. And we want to be at peace with ourselves. These are the themes on walls all over the world. And I think it just reflects how much we really share in common. I've wondered why I get so much out of seeing everyone else's struggles. I grew up secular. I didn't grow up with any religion. I didn't have any communal rituals to restore perspective and reflect on larger things like grief, yearning, redemption, humility, escapism. And it's hard because life is weird and difficult. But many of us have been left to our own devices, left to kind of figure out some of our darkest times alone without the rituals and reassurances of a community. I created this installation in New York City where people shared over 50,000 hopes and anxieties over the course of a year. There were a lot of anxieties that revealed the specific pains of our age. I'm anxious because being misunderstood is scary, because of the atmosphere of hate, because my children face a world more polarized than I did. We're living through a very divisive time in our country, and it's made me think about how we ended up here. Humans are inherently social creatures, and we have a fundamental need to connect with others and make sense of our place in the world. And for most of human history, we lived in small groups, like 50 people, 100 people. We cooperated with as many people as we could know well. And today, most of us live in cities of, thousands, millions. So it's easy to forget the humanity of the people around us and become impersonal and even adversarial. And when our physical communities act more like motels of passing strangers, it's harder to mobilize and drive change from the ground up. Our screens have reshaped the way that we communicate so completely that it seems that there are very few places to express ourselves in public without it being attached to a scoreboard. So when strangers are ready to judge you and AI is ready to placate you, I feel like the natural reaction is to isolate. The loneliness epidemic is becoming the biggest threat to our public health. And I did an experiment here just a few years ago as part of an exhibit on the history of walls at the Annenberg Space for Photography, where visitors were invited to respond to a question, what is blocking your path? And people shared over 3,000 reflections. The most popular response was by far the fear of not being good enough. There were dozens of responses like these. I'm worried about what people think of me, fear of rejection by the people I love. I don't want to let anyone down. I'll mess up and people won't like me. When our public sentiments are always graded by likes, it's very hard to be honest. So in our exhausted isolation, we escape. We think we're the only ones struggling and we retreat. But we don't want to. It makes me think, there is so much we could gain by seeing everyone else's struggles and how they have endured. And so that's what drove this project that we made in a cemetery in Brooklyn. How can a cemetery become a place to reflect on the many endings and beginnings throughout our lives? And how can we learn from the experiences of others? So inside the chapel, visitors were invited to anonymously share their experiences with loss in all forms, the loss of loved ones, of health, of worlds we once knew, and also share the rituals, the practices, the traditions that have helped us over time. And then place their scroll on this illuminated altar. People shared over 5,000 letters about loss and what has helped them along the way. People often ask me if I ever get kind of overwhelmed from all of the pain, and I never do, because I find the honesty so refreshing in our performative age. And also, just seeing other people's reflections and how they've struggled has even helped me kind of get pulled out of my own dark moments. So after a decade of creating participatory art, I have now become the caretaker of hundreds of thousands of reflections on life in the early 21st century. And I think they offer this kind of profound portrait of our age. And when I look back at where I started, I could never have planned where I ended up. I just made the thing that I wanted at the moment. And I've never had a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan. I've had like a few months plan, and it's worked for me. So that's why I'm increasingly, in awe of dwelling nowhere, being open and receptive to change and the unexpected, not clinging. And that's something that we can all do. All right. Thank you so much.